Will Stewart. I'm the Executive Director of Stay Work Play New Hampshire, and we're a statewide nonprofit whose mission is the attraction and retention of more young people here in the Granite State. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning for the second of a two-part webinar series that's really aimed at helping New Hampshire employers during this time of virtual work. Today's topic will look at orienting and onboarding new hires virtually. It's going to be a great presentation followed by a live Q&A session. So I know everybody's been already kind of participating there in the chat. So if you have any questions for Pubali, feel free to throw them down there, and we will definitely get to them. So anytime now, during the presentation, after that you have questions, just throw them down there in the comments section. Before we get started, I would like to thank Trivantis for sponsoring today's webinar and last week's as well. Trivantis is Stay Work Play's payroll provider, and they've been nothing but excellent to work with, personally speaking, and I recommend them for any of your payroll needs. So with that, let's get started. Let me introduce you to our featured presenter today. You've already been chatting with her, and if you were with us last week, you already know her. But for those of you who are new, I will introduce Pubali Chakravorty-Campbell, who is an accomplished entrepreneur and well-known HR professional. Pubali's passion is sharing her knowledge to help businesses grow and succeed. Leveraging her robust background and experience in business administration, executive coaching, as well as a professional designation as a senior certified HR professional, she specializes in strategic human resources for business owners and leaders who want to align their business goals with those of their workforce and become employers of choice. Originally from Louisville, Kentucky, Pubali has been in New England since 1997. As a member of New Hampshire's rich entrepreneurial community, she has won numerous business awards, such as New Hampshire Business Review's Outstanding Women in Business, New Hampshire Magazine's Remarkable Women, and the New Hampshire Union Leaders 40 Under 40. In 2019, she was selected as one of the Granite State's most influential business leaders by the New Hampshire Business Review. Please join me in welcoming Pubali Chakravorty-Campbell. Pubali, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Will. I will keep saying this over and over again, that introduction is very generous, so I really appreciate it. And good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I think this is our third week in a row of working together, and I've really enjoyed it. And if I have any repeat customers, I hope that you've been enjoying the work so far. And we're going to continue the series kind of talking about the employment culture, right? And not just in New Hampshire, but everywhere, but talking about how to effectively do your best to get, a position, which we talked about the first time. And last week, we talked a little bit about how are we going to bring people into our culture and what are we going to do to keep them engaged. And now we're talking about this process around orientation and onboarding. So as Will shared, and I'll just repeat, my presentations, whether I do it in person or I do it like this, I try to have it be more of a discussion than me kind of talking at you. There's 27 people. I think it's a manageable crowd. So at any point, if you want to pop in and ask a question, please feel free. I will stop over the course of my presentation a few times so that if there's anything that is burning and you want to really talk about it, let's have a conversation about it. Last week, we had a great time talking about some stuff that came up. So you're welcome to interrupt or type the questions in, and I'll do my best to respond to them. And Sarah or Will help me do that. So let's dive in. Onboarding. So I want to be clear in one thing, which is that right now, and this isn't a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination, but people are thinking about everything through the lens of this work from home scenario, which slowly is changing, right? We're beginning to see a shift in the way that is. Hopefully it'll continue in that trajectory. But regardless of whether you are onboarding people remotely or onboarding people in person, my objective is to give you practical advice that you can use in both capacities. Right? There's going to be some management, obviously, of you shifting things because you're doing it remotely versus in person, but really big picture stuff is very, very, easily transferable. And most importantly, it's not overly complicated. I think one of the mistakes a lot of employers make is they get very, very complex in their onboarding. And we're going to talk about that today, about how to do it correctly that matches your culture, but is also, feasible. That's not too outrageous. So the very, very first thing to talk about is the fact that orientation and onboarding are actually two different things. If you were with me last week, I briefly mentioned it. And this is where a lot of employers make a mistake, right? They say, oh, we're orienting our employees or we're onboarding our employees, and they're using the word interchangeably. So I want that to be maybe the big takeaway for you today, is that these are actually technically supposed to be completely separate. And we're going to talk about, how it stacks. There is a stacking concept to it, but remember that first and foremost. And how are they different? Well, orientation, I am a golfer. I'm using my quotation fingers because when I play golf, people laugh, and that's great because I'm terrible. But orientation, I want you to think to the golf analogy of the short game, right? You're not, thinking long term. You're not at the first tee. You're not starting anything. You're already kind of in this short capacity, and you know that it's got a defined start and it should have a defined conclusion. Whereas the long game is onboarding, right? So orientation, short game, onboarding, long game. And the duration of onboarding, we're going to talk a little bit about that later, really depends on your organization. I like to see companies have an onboarding process that is, and prepare yourself, somewhere in the range of 6 months to up to a year. And I know you're kind of going, oh my God, what does that mean? We're going to talk about it. But I like to see onboarding be this thing that happens for a very long time. Whereas orientation, I like to see in and around the 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks. Again, depending on your organization, it could even be just a week or even a few days, but trying to keep it into that 1 to 2 week box. So when I was thinking a little bit about how to talk about onboarding in a way that would make sense to the group, that would be relatable, that made kind of aha moments happen across the crowd, I thought about Maslow, right? So we all have heard of Maslow's theory of the hierarchy of needs, right? We know that, people, whether it's professionally or personally, people have basic needs that if they're not met, they are unable to accomplish other things, right? So we know that people need food, people need water, people need shelter, people need clothes, those very fundamental things. When we don't have them, we have other problems. I mean, social services is really built on that foundation, right? That we need to provide the fundamentals to our society so that they can be successful. So I really think that for the purposes of this conversation, this is a great model to think about onboarding through, right? And orientation through, but just the whole thing. So let's look at it together. At the very, very bottom, we have our physiological needs, right? Again, those are the fundamental things that we need to be able to concentrate, to be able to work, to be able to think. And then the next category up is safety and security. Then you get into the sense of belonging and being welcome someplace. And then you get into self-esteem. Then you get into self-actualization, which we're going to talk about. But when I think about orientation, right, I just joined your company. I accepted the offer. I've signed on the dotted line. What is it that you're going to do for me in those first few days up to about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks? You're going to take care of my physiological needs to the best of your abilities, and then you're going to take care of my safety and security. That is your priority in the orientation period, right? And don't worry, next slide is going to have some more information, but that is the first layer. And then onboarding, that, you remember what I said, 6, 9, 12 months, begins to go up through this triangle. So now we're adding on from physiological to safety and security. Now in the onboarding, we're beginning to embrace this individual, getting them comfortable, building their self-esteem. We're going to talk about how to do that. And then eventually, after about a year goes by, 9 months to a year, and then you start to look forward, focus, you're going to start to get them to have their aha moments and how do I begin to integrate myself into this company. I want to bring your attention to something on the left. I'm talking about this going you, them, 50-50. Whether it's orientation, whether it's onboarding, whatever it is, I always like to tell people that it's very, 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 very important that organizations own half, but they also ask their employees to own half. And what I mean by owning half is our success as a workforce is dependent on the employer, excuse me, their willingness to have us be successful, and vice versa. And whether it's orientation, whether it's onboarding, whatever it is, I, in my practice, see a lot of organizations struggling because they either take on 100% of the employee's happiness and they just own that burden, or they put it all on the employee. So I like to look at it through what can you do for me and what can I do for you? Not in the quid pro quo way, but just we're working on this together. So, you know, like I say at home, it takes two hands to clap. So kind of think about it through that lens as we're having this conversation today. So same model, a little bit more detail. Orientation. What are we doing during the orientation period? Well, for starters, we're making sure that our new hires know where to park. They know where the bathrooms are. Do you provide any free food, or do you have, you know, a place for people to put their lunch? How do you nourish yourself over the course of the day? Showing them that. Where's the water? Do you have bubblers? Do you have bottled water in the fridge? Do you have to just bring it yourself? What's the scoop? You're giving them the very fundamentals, right? The very fundamentals of their physiological needs you're filling in during the orientation period. Coffee, I mean, hey, we have to put that on the list, right? Where are they going to sit? Payroll. All the other stuff matters, but where and how and the frequency and all of the stuff related to income and compensation is physiological. People need to know where that's coming from. So we're going to make sure that we tackle that, get that squared away. And of course, things like time off. That also comes in very important in the category of physiological needs, at least to me. You may feel differently, because if people get sick or if people have family members that aren't feeling well, whatever, especially in this time of COVID, we need to make sure that the orientation focuses on this very fundamental part of Maslow's hierarchy, and then it moves up into the other categories. So orientation is that, plus we're doing safety and security. And in my mind, when I think safety and security, I'm thinking employee handbook, so you know what the rules are, so you're secure, so you're safe, and you're behaving appropriately. Keys or key cards to get in and out of the building, their computer, the security around the computer. Is it a laptop? Is it a desktop? Anything about things like their comfort, right? You know, is their desk the right desk? Do they need a standing desk? Whatever. You're getting the fact that this all has to do with the really easy stuff that comes with hiring someone new. So this is what's happening in the first week, maybe bleeding into the second week. You're talking about benefits. You're making sure they know how to get their benefits, email, communication, all of that stuff. And this is where companies often make the mistake of stopping. Okay, so people do this and they say, okay, cool. They're oriented, or worse, they're onboarded. So we're done. And this is what we're here to talk about today. The answer to that is actually no, you're not done. Because as this individual is now getting the very fundamental needs taken care of, we have to start to ensure their success in the other compartments as well, both extrinsic and intrinsic needs. So onboarding takes the fundamentals from orientation, right? Making sure they have what they need so they can concentrate and focus. And then it begins to talk about the stuff they're going to need to feel a sense of belonging to the organization. I thought about putting statistics into this presentation, but I just felt like having more of a dialogue with you guys today. But statistically, companies that do these two compartments well, the belonging and the self-esteem, they are the ones that have the employees at the very top of the pyramid that want to stay. Even with the multi-generational workforces, people are more apt statistically to stay at an organization that has invested time and resources, whatever those resources are, into these categories of belonging and self-esteem. So what does that look like? It means building a relationship, a meaningful relationship with their immediate manager or managers, depending on if you're a matrixed organization, you may have one person with 2 or 3 managers. That happens sometimes. What is the relationship with them? Not the manager-subordinate relationship that's very based on here's what you do, here's what you don't do. And again, we're going to kind of build on this and continue this theme over the conversation for the next hour or so. But that relationship and dynamic, answering certain questions around what does mutual success look like. Also building a relationship with the executives of the company. I realize that if you're representing a company that has 100,000 people, 50,000 people, 25,000 people, that's going to be difficult. Maybe in that case, the executives are not, people that are touchable. They're so far away, they may be in another state. But you're trying to think about going up the ladder and making sure that workers have an opportunity to connect with the people that are 2, maybe 3 categories above them. Because if you want them to belong, and if you want them to feel like they belong, they need to be able to look beyond their immediate teams. And this is important for the long game. Remember, onboarding is long game, orientation is short game. So we want to think about keeping them engaged in the long term. How do you do that? You make friends, you make connections, you make a network, and you do that within the organization. Then you look at the team itself. Are you building a relationship with the team? There's a lot of stuff that comes into that, including conflict resolution, conflict management, team building, communication, effective communication, training on these types of things so that people can work well together, so that nobody feels like the black sheep. You're talking about culture. You're talking about values. I'll tell you a little values, a small anecdote here. A lot of times companies have these incredible values that they have posted on their walls. It's all over their website. They may even have little tchotchkes that they give out to people with their values on it. Values don't mean anything if they live on marketing collateral. What matters is, are the values something that people are embodying every day? And a great way to do that is looking at your values and having conversations with your workforce about what those values mean to them. I used to work with a company a long time ago that had really complicated values, and their philosophy was, if you don't believe in all of the values, you're not going to be a good employee here. And I remember having very, very spirited conversations with the CEO and saying, that's not reasonable or fair, because we might come in and say we like some of the values, but it's possible that you may not see eye to eye on all of them. And that's okay, provided you have a dialogue about what that means and what the impacts of that are going to be. So that also builds a sense of belonging. Are you having fun, right? Are you taking people out for lunch or doing something social? Not forcing people to be your friends by any means, but are you doing things that are keeping them excited about being in the workplace? Of course, there's perks, there's incentives, there's rewards, there's ways to make people feel like, you care about them. A simple thank you up to selecting a gift from from a catalog, depending on an accomplishment, and you're building that confidence. So if you saw my presentation last week, I showed the iceberg. These are 1-hour presentations. There's so much to talk about in this area, so this is really just the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully giving you some idea. So building that belonging happens in the onboarding phase. Now, do you see why it takes 6, 9, 12 months? Because this stuff does not happen very quickly. You need to use a relationship and some, culture to get that, across to your workforce. And then the other part of onboarding is to build their self-esteem. And what does that mean? When people in the workplace only have a handbook or an annual performance review as their resource, their only tool to set goals, to know expectations, to share their expectations of the organization, or to share their concerns or questions, you're going to have a less successful team dynamic and culture and organization long term. So I'm going to say that again. If an organization looks to do these aspects of onboarding, belonging and self-esteem, once a year, or very, very periodically, or impersonally, only through an online survey, for example, you're going to be less successful than if you have a continuous performance management process in place, combination of formal and informal, where this onboarding best practice of setting mutual goals, not unilateral, but both individuals, both employee and employer, you see on the left, 50-50, sits down and does stuff to kind of express their needs and wants mutually, to set expectations mutually, to coach, to mentor. Coaching and mentoring, 2 different things, all right? So we can maybe talk about that another time. So you're doing the performance management, you're having a dialogue about how this person is going to grow within your organization. It sounds like a lot of work. It can be, depending on how you're approaching it, but in onboarding for the first 6, 9 months, 12 months, we really want to think about doing these two things, building the self-esteem, building the belonging, but doing it in a way where you are bringing half and they're bringing half to the table. And at the very top, I'm going to flip back and forth here, the self-actualization, this aha, this I'm a part of this, now I know, now I feel, now I want, now I'm going to be here, I'm coming in as my whole self. Those are the different behaviors that lead to people wanting to stay. All right. Can you control 100%? No. But if you do things in a certain order with a certain objective, you're going to have better rates and statistics as to people staying. So in the onboarding process, you're building, and it takes time. Do you stop after a year? No, you don't. But you may not have to have as much of this after the first year. You're maybe doing it a little bit less, you're doing it differently, they're more empowered. So you're getting the point. Again, all of this matters where, how big is your company? How big is your budget? What are you doing with your time? There's going to be things that play into that. That's going to be hard for me to tackle given the size of this group, but it has to look like your culture. We'll talk about that more. So what are some questions that you can ask yourself and your HR group or your leadership group to see how you can do this, just start doing this, or how you can do it better? In the orientation phase, if you're representing a company today and the company's been in business for 30 years, you have something in place, obviously. So how do you improve on that? Or if you're representing a startup, how do you think about that as your company grows? In the orientation bubble, which is the bottom 2 rungs on this hierarchy, the question is, are we good? Are we showing good hospitality? I'm from the South. I grew up in Kentucky. Southerners are famous for their hospitality, right? Making sure you take care of the very fundamental needs of a person. Are we being hospitable as an employer? Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves in the orientation phase. Is it working? If you already have something in place, is it working? Well, it looks like I have a typo. That should be an it, not an is, right? So how do people feel about it? Are there opportunities to improve? Are people comfortable? You can go online and read horror stories of people coming in and not knowing where to park and having their car towed on their first day of work, or getting some sort of a citation because they didn't know what to do and how to do it. So those questions help us improve our orientation process. Are we being hospitable? Is our current process working? Are people comfortable when they walk in the door? And you can, I'm not going to spoiler alert, but we'll talk about this as well. How do you know? You have to ask. You have to do some due diligence. In the onboarding piece, the questions get more difficult, as you can see. The questions get a little bit more touchy-feely. They get a little bit more difficult to answer, which is, who are we and you? Who am I? What kind of an organization am I? And what is it that I need my workforce to do? And how do I need them to do it? You're entitled to ask those questions, just like they're entitled to ask you, well, who am I? And how, who are we as the workforce? How are we going to be successful? So you're having this dialogue. What does success look like? As an executive coach, if you know a coach, if you yourself are a coach, if you work in human resources, what does success look like is one of the most impactful questions, because it gives people an opportunity to tell you what they're looking to accomplish or what they need in a way that is safe, right? And it's accessible. So what does success look like? Do you currently agree or disagree with what we're doing? Are you getting what you need? Are we working well together? Do you need training on something? Are we being proactive about the tools and resources we're giving you? Or are we being reactive and only giving you stuff when you ask 10 times for it? Playing out what if scenarios. What do I mean by this? This is really important. In the first year, one of the most important questions an employer can ask their employee is, what do I need to do to keep you? Now, a lot of employers I've worked with don't like asking that question because they're convinced that their employees are going to say, I want more money, or I want more fancy benefits. we touched on this a little bit last week, not asking your workforce questions like that out of fear for them wanting more is one of the most, I don't know, idiotic reasons for not doing something, because you're operating from a place of fear and you're operating from a place of loss if you're coming at it that way. So playing out what if scenarios, asking people, what if this happens? How will you react? What if that happens? These are ways that we can build that belonging and build the self-esteem. Remember, it's a 50-50 deal. So you also have to, get something from them. And if it's a one-way street, all them or all you need to address that first, because then it's not going to be very successful for anybody. So this is deep stuff. So I'm going to hit the pause button. Questions, comments, concerns. Is there anything I can address before we move forward? I'm going to do a time check. I'm looking at the clock.
There's nothing in the comments so far, but again, if anyone has any questions at any time, just shoot them down there, and we'll ask them directly to Pubali.
Okay, and the other question I'll ask the audience is, do you understand this model and kind of how we're building on it? Are you having an aha moment about how this process works as it pertains to orientation and onboarding? And if you don't want to answer, that's totally fine. But let me know if I can be more clear or make this more accessible for you. That's my job to be able to do that. Okay, so I'm not seeing any chats and everybody's still engaged in listening, so I will continue. So what do companies do? So maybe you're all going, okay, great on the theory, give me some concrete stuff here. Let's talk about the concrete stuff. To start, what do companies that have excellent orientations and onboarding programs, what are they doing? What are their success stories? To start, they have, not when the person starts, not a week after the person has started, but before people are hired, they have talked about what they need, why they need it, and leadership has bought into it, and leadership is involved in it. Anytime you hear me do organizational effectiveness and design anything, which is the area that I do a lot of work in, and education, workforce development, things like that, one of the top success metrics for any initiative is leadership buy-in and involvement. If you're trying to do these things better and nobody but you and the organization cares about it, you are going to have a very difficult ride. And maybe some of you are sitting there going, yes, I've already experienced that. So getting that buy-in, getting that involvement, and doing it through the lens of, we are spending X $1,000 to hire this person, to lose them for silly reasons and have to do it again, it's going to cost us a lot of money. And so kind of trying to speak in the language of your leadership if you're getting challenged, and having people understand why this kind of process is so important is really important. What else do people do? You have 2 documented plans, one for orientation, one for onboarding. Now, I am not a fan of documentation because I'm in HR, and HR people love documentation because you need it. It's a risk management process, right? I'm a fan of documentation because I can be forgetful. I'm a human being and I'm fallible. I'm a fan of documentation because I like consistency. I was a business owner for years and years. And as a business owner, consistency is one of the main ways that you can have a successful organization and client service. Why do I like documentation? Simple, because anyone can do it. Redundancy. Something happens to me, I have another member of my staff that can pick up where I left off. Documented plans help us manage great projects and have success. Write it down, have it be a process. You're going to have more success than winging it every time you hire someone. The larger companies that hire 20, 30 people at a time and have these complex, really, really well thought out, organized processes, they do it for a reason, because it works and it's scalable, right? So think about that. I put HRIS into parentheses. This is Human Resources Information System. And why did I put that in there? If you are using a software like, Paylocity or Bamboo HR, Oracle HR, there's a billion of them. A lot of times they have it already. You have it. It's already there. So, ADP, So those processes are in your HRIS, and so take advantage of it, use it. Winning organizations also do things that mirror their company. If you have a 5-person company, you're going to have a system that looks very different than if you have a 500-person company. When organizations try to reach too high and they're too complicated or too formal and it doesn't match their culture, then it's less successful. So whatever you do, make sure it looks like you, it feels like you, and it's going to mirror the other individuals that are within your organization. The other winning success factor is customized for your unit of business. And what do I mean by that? If you are in accounting, your onboarding is going to be different than if you are in human resources. If you are in business operations, it's going to look very different than sales. There's certain things in the orientation period that are going to be equal for everybody in your organization coming in. But when you get into onboarding, that's when you're going to start to make things a little bit different because it has to mirror the unit of business that they're working in. So if we try to do a one-size-fits-all approach, we're not going to be as successful. Some parts of the onboarding will be the same because it's like belonging, it's building the culture, it's the coaching, the mentoring approach, but then the technical things have to be different. Now that's not rocket science, but I'm telling you because a lot of times companies don't do that because they don't have a formal onboarding process consistent across the organization. That's what I was talking about. The things that are unique to the business unit are obviously different, but things related to growth and the career development process, that has to be the same. When we do separate rules for separate people, it affects morale, it changes the culture, and it damages the company's reputation. Somebody in one group should not have a completely different experience than somebody in another group. Those two people are eventually going to talk to one another, and that's where you're going to begin to have a lot of static and friction within your organization. So whatever you do, make sure it's as consistent as it can be while honoring the differences that are in the business units themselves. Remember, 2 weeks or less is the orientation time frame. That's the usual best practice. I even think 2 weeks is a little long. I mean, if you have a new hire and it's taken you 2 weeks to get them a computer, a desk, business cards, and show them where to park, you may need to look at your process. But that really should be done within the first few days of someone's hire. Onboarding, 9 months to a year, I cannot emphasize it enough. It is very, very important, and it's worth it. It's worth it to have a process that takes that long because it really does change the culture. It helps your employees want to stick around longer. Obviously budgeted. Now, what do I mean by that? If you need to buy a plane ticket for your new sales manager to have them fly around with other members of the sales team to see how that works, that decision shouldn't be made after the person has started. I have seen this. This is a real life example. You need to have a budget for any kind of, ancillary expenses related to onboarding a new member of your workforce. It looks terrible when the employee is saying, I would really like to learn. I really need to see this in action. And you're going, let me get it approved. And it's 6 months later, it hasn't been approved. So please, please, as a part of your onboarding process, make sure if you need a special budget, it's been approved, you have the funds so that people can be moved quickly through the onboarding process with these types of educational experiences or other needs that they have. Managed by HR, okay, I'm biased, guilty as charged, right? But the bottom line is that if you don't have a dedicated HR person in your company, you may need to assign that function of onboarding and orientation to someone, and that person really owns that role. That consistency comes with ownership. And yes, people come and go, but at least at a minimum, you've got an individual that can hand it off to someone if they do choose to exit your organization. But when you have 100 people each doing their version of onboarding, you're going to have a lot of problems. And you may be sitting there going, oh my gosh, that happens at my organization now. Do you just burn everything to the ground and say, let's start fresh? No, but you do have to figure out a way to be consistent if you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide. Orientation and onboarding effectively communicated. Why does this fail for companies? It fails because they don't have somebody dedicated handling the situation. When things are left open for interpretation, when you've got 3 or 4 people answering the same question differently, when timelines aren't clear, when there's this whole process to get things approved, this is poor communication. That means that you haven't planned accordingly, right? Or if these things are going to happen because it was a strategic hire, you didn't have time, some sort of like a issue like that is happening, you're communicating that to your new employee. You're being transparent. Look, we wanted to bring you in. We didn't want someone else to scoop you up. We have to get some ducks in a row. Please be patient with us. That's also fine. There's no shame in that. If you hire me as a strategic hire and you haven't gotten your ducks in a row, and you tell me that, I'm going to be very impressed with your organization. I'm going to say I've made a good decision because you're being honest with me. And lastly, offer people, not just in orientation, onboarding, hands-on support. Last week, I talked a little bit about this when companies say, here's the handbook, or they forward a link. You know, if you need to find anything, Control F, find it. That's not hands-on support. You don't want to leave anything open to interpretation, and it just doesn't look good, right? So try to do the hands-on help. Okay, why do companies fail in this category of onboarding and orientation? I'm going to do a time check. Looking good. The companies fail for some reasons. This isn't all of them. Just like before, the success, I didn't give everything because I don't know everything. Why do companies fail? First, they have very punitive interaction in the orientation and onboarding phase. And what I mean by that is the times that leadership and management and people really step in with the new hire is when the new hire makes a mistake. If interaction is only when something is going wrong, you're doing a very bad Pavlovian, experiment here. You're going to notice that people are going to be less excited to meet certain members of your company because the only time they come out of their office is to slap a wrist. So if you're doing some of the things we've talked about, and it's a longer process, there's constant dialogue, whether it's once a month or every other week or whatever the cadence is, then you're going to incorporate and fold punitive, if necessary, or disciplinary action into that, not necessarily like the PIP kind of thing where you're putting on the improvement plan, so it's a little bit more formal. But you don't want to only interact with new people when something goes sideways. That's a common failure. So try to avoid that. The other thing is making new hires false promises. This is an issue with the interview process. This is an issue with the orientation process. And this goes on to becoming an issue with companies that have even a longer, more robust onboarding process, which is that they say things when, the quid pro quo is on the bottom, but they say things like, if you can do X, we will do Y. Unless you can say definitively that you can give somebody a promotion or a raise or an incentive or a bonus or whatever, then do not make those types of promises. Those are very, very risky, and it does affect people's motivation, because if something goes sideways and you can't deliver on a promise, you're going to have a higher risk of losing a good employee. So making sure that you don't make commitments that you can't keep. One-sided relationships. We talked a little bit about this. That's why over and over again, I'm just going to go back. I said you, them, 50-50. Why did I say that? If I am the employer and I've hired you and I'm doing all the talking, kind of like I am today, and I'm doing all the rulemaking and I'm the authority figure, I'm training you to be quiet. And I don't think companies with great cultures are training their workforce to just sit there and listen. It's two-sided. They're also responding, and they should have the comfort to respond. So orientation and onboarding should be a two-sided, bilateral relationship. Companies that don't do it well, it's very one-sided, it's very punitive. The other thing that companies don't do well often is that they layer these check-ins, these conversations about sense of belonging and how are they feeling about their role into routine business discussions. Now, if you work with me ever, you're going to find that this is a pattern of mine. I really, really do not like seeing managers just tuck these types of conversations into a meeting about 20 other things. When we are talking with new employees, whether it's orientation phase or onboarding, about them and their success, it should be a standalone conversation, not walk with me to my car, not let's fold it into the last 5 minutes of this staff meeting, but a dedicated conversation. That's how you build the belonging, and that's how you build the morale. So keep that in mind. Try to do it in person if possible. A lot of companies, again, they just tuck it into a phone call. This is where it's tricky because of COVID. If you're not in person yet, try to do it by video. At a minimum, do it by phone. But please, I beg you, during the orientation and onboarding phase, please limit the stuff that's over email and the stuff that's over text. It does not always go well. It's impersonal. And I know you're going to have to do some of it. And I'm not saying everything has to be by phone or webinar or in person, but try to do the more important, the heavier stuff with a live, liveness if possible, phone, web, or in person. Please, please, please. The weather is nice. Stand 6 feet apart in the parking lot and have a conversation if you need to. And just moving a little bit more quickly through these, this is common sense stuff, guys. If you're way too casual, hey, let's go ride the elliptical machine together in the company gym and talk about your growth strategy. No, that's tacky. Overly formal. Let's go to a fine dining restaurant over, a $300 bottle of wine and talk about whether or not you're feeling a sense of belonging. Come on. I mean, maybe that's kind of cool, but the bottom line is it has to be comfortable and accessible. Another mistake people make is they don't document, right? So people say stuff, but nobody keeps track of it. So it's easy to forget. That's what I said right out of the gate. I'm famously forgetful. I write everything down. And depending on the conversation that I'm having with you, I'm going to follow up with an email and say, this is the stuff we talked about, right? That's just the best practice for project management anyway. So not having a record, not for punitive disciplinary reasons, but so that you know that you owe somebody something. Those quid pro quo agreements. If you sell this many cars in the first 6 months, I'm going to give you a big raise. If you close this many deals, if you can hire this many people, then I'm going to give you a promotion. That's risky business. Sometimes it happens, I get it, but I would be very, very careful about making promises like that because it can come back and bite you in the butt. And honestly, it can put you at risk too for other things, depending on, with the protected class of the employee. So please be careful about that. Too many cooks in the kitchen is a common failure, right? So we were talking about that before. If every hiring manager in your organization has their own onboarding process, completely unique from everybody else's, you're going to get into some trouble. I told you that that's going to be normal because you're different from accounting, is different from HR, is different from operations, but the entire process can't be completely different because then it gets into favoritism. It could look like you're being discriminatory. There's some risk there. So make sure you have, the appropriate number of cooks in the kitchen, not equitable. That's what I'm talking about. You have to make sure that your processes are fair to everyone and they don't favor one person over another, one team over the other. Again, this is the HR hat I'm putting on. I want to protect you guys from any sort of, case around, they are not treating me fairly here. And that can be an expensive and very scary thing to have to go through. So think about equity. And then of course, an undefined end. So orientation, onboarding, we talked about the timeframes. Make sure people know what those timeframes are so that you're not kind of playing it loose and then 2.5 years goes by, oh, let's close the chapter on onboarding. So have it be defined. Best practices, we talked about a lot of these things, so I'm just really going to focus on a couple because I don't need to read all of these to you. I've done enough reading to you today. But some of the best practices that I see have to do with the employer asking the employee questions. Employees that are solicited for feedback regularly feel a sense of belonging and the fact that they are a part of the organization. The risk is when we ask our workforce questions and they answer and we take no action, that is a risk. And I've been called in before to companies who have done engagement surveys and they're frustrated because people are, worse off than they were when they took the survey, and why isn't this working and why are people grumbling? And the first question I ask is, well, what did you guys do after the survey? Oh, it's been sitting in our drawer for a year. Okay. So people are not even necessarily looking to have what they ask for given to them. What they're looking for is, are you listening? And if you can't give somebody something that they're asking for, that you're telling them and explaining that to them. So in a best practice, you're interviewing your existing employees. What did I do well? What could I have done better? Please help me so that I can do better next time. You're consulting with your contemporaries. Call your competition up. see if they're willing to have a conversation with you. You know, maybe they won't. Maybe they're very, very secret and private about it. That's fine. Maybe they will, but maybe you guys can come up with some great ideas to share. Research your reputable sources. I am a SHRM person. You've got people that are organizational effectiveness and design consultants. You've got HR consultants. Work with these people to help you improve your process, because we have experience and we have some book training and formal training in areas that you may not, right? So I don't do my own dentistry because otherwise I wouldn't have any teeth. So similarly, if you're not a subject matter expert in something, consider working with someone that is, so that you can have a better practice. So these are some other best practices that I like to recommend. And I would love it after this is over, and I only have a couple slides left, to hear what you've done. Because presumably you're doing something right, and I would love to know what you're doing if you're willing to share. I'm sure your cohorts on this class would too. This slide, you may remember it from last week. Here's this lovely young lady looking in the mirror at herself. I've said it 1,000 times, whatever you do needs to mirror you. It needs to be appropriate for your company, for your budget. It has to be appropriate for the existing workforce. It has to be something that is doable, that's scalable. You know, it may not be possible for you to do some of the things that I've suggested today. Maybe the industry you work in, if you go out and you ask certain types of questions, it's going to potentially go sideways. I know that can happen. I know the environments vary. So whatever you do, make sure it mirrors you. And if you're wanting to grow, right? If you want to be an employer of choice and you make improvements and you want to do things differently, then use an organized process to introduce new things within your company. Again, work with experts that do this for a living so that you're not going this route alone. Okay, so with, as always, 5 minutes to spare for some Q&A and some feedback time. Thank you. Thank you for your time. I'm thrilled that you're here. Honored some of you have visited me several times. I'm touched by that. This is the way to get a hold of me. I love this picture of Tom Hanks. You get it? T. Hanks, thanks. So this is a pleasure for me to be with you, and I would love to have any questions, comments, feedback, ideas, anything, whether it's about how I can do better next time or anything you'd like me to know or share with the rest of your group. Fire away.
Yes, like I said, folks, feel free to throw any questions, comments that you have down there in the chat. You know, while we're waiting to see.
Quiet group today.
What's that?
It's a quiet group today.
It is. I think they're soaking it all in. So you know, while they're collecting their thoughts, perhaps just want to say thanks, Pubali. This is again I think our third webinar we've done together, and it's very much appreciated. You know, sharing your wisdom and knowledge and experience with us. You've delivered great content, as you always do, in a very engaging manner. So on behalf of all of us, thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we've got a quiet crowd today. I've clearly either put you all to sleep or I have stunned you with some great information. If you finish up and log off from this today, oh, I see a couple comments, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly and ask the questions. This is what I do for a living. I would love to help you. Let me. Okay, I see a couple questions, and if I may take 2 minutes and answer them. I received a question from an individual. Oh, you're very welcome, you guys. Very, very, very welcome. Someone did ask a great question. They said, when asking the question, what do I need to do to keep you? Is this best done in person or by survey? Okay, that's an excellent question. I will always tell you that when you ask these types of very personal, very important questions, you do two things. You consider the audience and you try to consider the importance of having this question in person. The person you're asking may not do well in that one-on-one environment to the question asker or the question receiver. So you need to do a little bit of due diligence and say, okay, maybe in this case, a survey is better. Maybe in this case, a private email is better. Maybe in this case, the in-person is better. I believe in the power of an in-person conversation. Even if you do a hybrid approach and you say, I would like to know this information, you say it maybe over email, and you say, guys, this is something I need to know. I want to do right by you. I want our organization to be strong. This is information I want. Think about it, and can we get together and talk about it in person, or are you comfortable? So asking the person you're needing the information from is a great way to do that. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. So try to do it in person, ask first, and then have an in-person conversation. Or if the party's not comfortable, then by all means, you got to do it in an electronic way, but ask the question. All right. So, and I see another question coming in. Important for to know the total cost. Yes, yes. This works for budgeting as well as puts the importance of retaining. Yeah, maybe a reasonable increase in wages is affordable over the long run. Yeah, I agree. I think that, and not only that, to the asker, to Gloria, I'm a believer that that piece of information in a way that is safe for the organization is important for employees to know. A lot of times people don't understand what the cost is to have an employee, and it can really help to get, people to talk about, their needs and wants differently. So I know a lot of people have a one pager that kind of shows the cost of insurance, the cost of this, and so what total comp, it's a total comp analysis versus what they think they're getting. So again, it depends on your culture, but I agree with you fully, Gloria. Michelle, thank you. It's my pleasure. Lisa, well, hey, no time like the present. You're welcome, Beth. And I know, Jennifer, I agree with you. I wish we could get out of pandemic mode. But, a lot of the stuff you could do remotely. You just have to find some, get the mail, stuff shipped, and make the time. But with that, I want to honor everybody's schedule. I'm happy to stick around for a second if anybody has any questions, but you're very, very welcome, everyone. And good luck, Michelle, on your next meeting.
Yeah, so speaking of Michelle over at Dartmouth College, just wanted to give a quick shout out to some of the other members of the Stay Work Play Board of Advisors. Pubali, you mentioned employers of choice, and these are certainly employers who are due to their as indicated by their support of Stay Work Play, or very interested in being and becoming and remaining employers of choice. I know we have folks this morning from Franklin Savings Bank, from Granite State College, Exeter Health Resources, Barry Dunn, St. Mary's Bank, GZA, Core Medical, and the NEAF Network. So thank you all for joining us today. As was noted in the chat a little while ago, a recording of this presentation will be available in a day or two on the Stay Work Play YouTube channel, so be sure and check it out there. Also, a couple things before we go. Would like to say to encourage all of your companies to consider nominating your own organizations or others that you admire for Stay Work Play's Cool Company of the Year Award that's given out as part of Stay Work Play's Rising Stars Awards coming up in October. You can learn more about the Cool Company of the Year Award and the nomination process at stayworkplay.org/Rising Stars Awards. Finally, I know Pubali mentioned a little bit about providing your employees with a little bit of fun. So if you're looking for a way to do that these days, fun is definitely in short supply, I think. I'd like to let you know about a fun event coming up that Stay Work Play is putting on June 3rd, otherwise known as 603 Day. And we always like to celebrate that here at Stay Work Play. And so this year, we're going to be hosting a New Hampshire-themed virtual trivia event that will allow your employees to have some fun with people from around the state in a virtual online setting, of course. So if you have an interest in that, check out Stay Work Play's social media channels in the next day or two for more details about the event and how to sign up. So with that, thank you again to Pubali for sharing her wisdom and experience with us. And thank you to you all for joining us this morning, sharing your time, and hope it's been worth your while. And with that, thank you and have a great day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.